Greetings and welcome to Lecture 1.4, Experimental Design and Ethics. First things first, go through the terminology for this section. Click on each of the words to become familiar with its definition and meaning. You will use statistics extensively if you do any research, especially for your master's or your doctorate degrees. Now we need to figure out the difference between observation and an experiment. An observation is just like the little boy in the picture. He is looking at the butterfly, but he's not influencing the butterfly at all. Better still if he was back a little bit further and not influencing the butterfly at all to fly off or do any particular thing. An experiment is when there is something influencing the situation. We have three different types of variables. We have explanatory variables, response variables, and lurking variables. Explanatory variables and response variables go hand in hand. In fact, you really don't have one without the other. The explanatory variable is also called independent variable. And the response variable is called the dependent variable. Now let me give you an example. Let's say we are part of the team of veterinarians that want to compare the effectiveness of two fertility treatments for pandas in captivity. The two treatments are in vitro fertilization and male fertility medications. This experiment has one explanatory variable, the type of fertility treatment. And the response variable is the measure of fertility rate. Lurking variables are also called confounding variables. They are related to explanatory variables and response variables, but it's when outside variables can influence the results of your study. So let's go back to the panda fertility. And let's say a group of pandas, we have them in the two groups of the in vitro fertilization and the male medication for fertilization. And as it turns out, when we are looking at the results, some of the pandas have a really high fertility rate, but their diet was different. Well, we weren't studying the diets of the pandas. We were studying just the treatments that we were giving to them for the fertility. And therefore, a diet, an outside diet, could be what's called a lurking variable. We weren't studying it, but it could cause some effect on our experiment. An experimental unit is also called a case. It's the individual from which the data are collected. When data are collected from humans, we sometimes call them participants. When data are collected from animal, we sometimes call them subjects. Blinding is a technique we use in studies to avoid bias. There's a couple of different types of blinding. One is called a single blind study and the other is called a double blind study. A single blind study just means that the participants don't know which group they're in. Are they in group A or group B? Maybe group A has a different medicine than group B. So the participants do not know which group they are in. A double blind study is one that neither the participant nor the researchers know which group they are in. And the reason why we might want to do that is, let's say you are my friend, I am a doctor, you are in my study for a cure for shortness, let's say. You want to play in the NBA, but you're only 5'6", and you need another foot of height to even be considered. And I have a medicine that might be able to do that. I put you in my study, and I know which group you're in. Now, I know you have the desire to be in the NBA, so I'm probably going to put you in the group with the medication. Because of that, I have influenced the experiment, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I'm saying that it could happen. When you're in a double-blind study, I don't know which group you're in, and you don't know what group you're in. And that's probably the best study for most things regarding medication. Now, there's something called a control group, and there's something called placebo. You've probably heard these two things before. A control group is usually the group that is not on the medicine. And let's say group A, those folks are on the medicine, and group B are not on the medicine. Therefore, group B would be my control group. They are not on the medicine. But as you might be aware, the attitudes we have in life can make a difference about our health. So if I know I'm not on the medication, maybe that gets me bummed out and my health deteriorates. Maybe I know I am on the medicine, and that's kind of really scary, and that affects my physical body as well. So sometimes what we do is we put you in a blind study. You don't know if you are on the medicine or not, but we got to give those folks that aren't on the medicine something so they think they are on the medication. That is what's called a placebo. It's usually a pill or it's an injection that it has no effect whatsoever, at least negative, on your body. You think you're taking the medication. So that's what's called a placebo. It's fake medicine, in essence. And yes, it could be a shot. It could just be a shot of what's called saline, water with a little bit of salt in it. It could just be a sugar pill. It's not supposed to affect you in any way. That way you think you're on the medicine, but you're actually not. You're in the control group. Let's take an example and try and pull out the population, the sample, the experimental units, the explanatory variable, the response variable, and the treatments. So a researcher wants to investigate whether taking an aspirin regularly reduces the risk of a heart attack. 400 men between the ages of 50 and 84 are recruited as participants. The men are divided randomly into two groups. One group will take aspirin, and the other group will take a sugar pill. Each man takes one pill a day for 3 years, but he does not know whether he's taking the aspirin or the sugar pill. At the end of the study, researchers count the number of men in each group who have the heart attack. What would be the population in this example? Now, it's dealing with 400 men between the ages of 50 and 84. And in fact, those 400 men who participate in this experiment are actually our sample. The population would be all men aged 50 to 84. So population, men aged 50 to 84. Sample, the 400 men who participated in the study. The experimental units, well, each individual man in the study, they would be the experimental unit. The explanatory variable is oral medication. The response variable is what are we measuring? It's whether the subject had a heart attack or not. And then the treatment is the actual treatment that they gave the subjects, whether it was an aspirin or a placebo. So the treatments are the aspirin and the placebo. You've reached the end of this lesson.